What's going on YouTube? My name is Ted and welcome back to another episode of Cooking with Ted. Today we are making broth and a condensed broth. You may remember in a previous video where I made bolognese, I mentioned, hey, here's a condensed broth you should put in there, or use regular broth. You should watch that video. It's a good video. So is it a broth or is it a stock? Now, technically speaking, a broth is made with meat and vegetables, and a stock is made with bones. Now, I use the terms interchangeably. If anybody yells at you or says, hey, that's technically a broth, or hey, that's technically a stock, tell them to knock it off. Say whatever you want. Call it whatever you like. Call it savory tea. Call it hot meat water. Call it brown yum. So this is an incredibly similar process as one that was posted by the incomparable Frank Prizanzano. This is kind of a hybrid of Frank Prizanzano's Brodo Pseudogo method and a thing called the Prime Broth, which is from this book called The Prime Diet. I think that's what that book is called. If that's not what it's called, I'll fix that in the editing bay. Thanks, future Ted. You're welcome. I'm always fixing his stuff. I am sweating. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I keep my chicken bones in the freezer. I find that's a good way to keep them without having them spoil, because a lot of times I'll eat chicken, but I'll only have like 3 or 4 bones left. So I just keep them all in a big gallon-sized Ziploc bag in the freezer, and then when I have enough, I'm like, great, it's time to make broth. Now, some people will use oxtail. I used raw drumsticks. That worked really well. But the one point I do want to make is that I would highly recommend making sure that you use high-quality meats for this recipe. Now, what I mean by that is go to a local butcher. Go to a butcher that in your area that might really pride itself on using sustainable methods. The better quality of life that animal had, the better this broth is going to turn out. I've made this broth before with like Costco rotisserie chickens, like the factory farm situation, and it's just not the same. So, food for thought. Think about where your food comes from and make sure that that chicken had a good life if you're going to be using it in a pot. One thing that did happen, and I missed this, and I'll probably cut this, but for this recipe, I'm using approximately 2 to 3 pounds of bones and chicken parts. I didn't actually measure it because, why? You guessed it. The scale sucks! But I do want to give a shout out to my brother Oliver. He did send me a new scale, and it's awesome. Thank you, Oliver. Bless. We're going to start off by putting our frozen bones in this stock pot and adding about a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar. Do I measure out a 1/4 cup? No. I just splash it until it looks pretty good. Now, this is part of an Ayurvedic method because it breaks down some of the proteins in the bone and will allow it to be able to leach more nutrients into the broth that we're making. Thank you, Mom, and thank you, The Prime book, whatever that book is called. Let this sit for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to add our filtered water. Now, it's important to use filtered water. A lot of tap water has chlorine and fluoride in it. If you can find freshly bottled water, or if you're really nuts and want to get distilled water, I'd say go for that as well. Fill it up to the top, and then you're going to bring it to about medium heat. You don't want to crank it up all the way to high. We want to make sure that we don't disturb a lot of the solids that are sitting at the bottom of the pot, because we want to make sure that this broth looks nice and clear. Anything that's going to be cloudy, that's not going to give us as good of a flavor as we could get. So we're going to start up by putting the heat on medium, and then you're going to skim any floaties or gross things that float up to the top. I used a ladle and a bowl just to skim out some of that stuff, and you're going to skim for a while. This is probably going to take about 5 to 10 minutes, but this is a very important step. So make sure you skim all of that stuff off. And once it's looking pretty clear and you don't see any other scum floating up to the top, now it's time to add our vegetables. Now for the vegetables, you can kind of add whatever you like. What I did is I added about 1.5 onions, not peeled, but cut in half, root to tip again. And then I added about 3 to 4 carrots that I did peel. You don't necessarily need to peel them, but make sure you scrub a lot of the dirt off. I added about 3 to 4 ribs of celery. And then I added a whole garlic clove that I cut in half widthwise, and about a knob of garlic about this big that I also cut in half widthwise. One last thing I added were some green onions. Now I just cut some green onions in half one way and just put it all on top. Now I'm not mixing this. I'm not stirring this. I'm just letting it sit on top because eventually those herbs and those vegetables will gradually settle. This is just a great way to use any scraps, any vegetable scraps you might have lying around. I do have a bag in my freezer full of like kale stems, onion peels, anything like that or mushroom stems, stuff like that, that you can put into your broth just to add some more layers of flavor and nutrients. Things you wouldn't necessarily want to eat, but you can definitely put in a soup stock or broth, stock or broth. About 5 or 6 hours later, we're gonna take our containers that we're putting the broth into and we're gonna ladle it out very gently. Again, we don't wanna disturb anything on the bottom. So what we're gonna do is take the ladle and put a strainer over our containers, and one ladle at a time, we're just gonna ladle it into these containers. I got about 3 quarts worth of broth from this because, again, I'm letting it simmer for about 5 to 6 hours, so you'll see that the liquid level does reduce significantly. Just again, cannot be clear enough about this. Don't stir up the bottom because there's a lot of stuff down there that you're not necessarily gonna want in your broth. This way you're getting the clearest, best stuff at the top. As a wise man once said, the cream always rises to the top, and the broth always does the same. So continue pressing down until you can't get more broth out of the pot. Again, we're not gonna scoop, we're not gonna tilt it and empty it in any way. We wanna leave about, there's gonna be a significant amount of liquid at the bottom of that pot. So now we have about 3 containers worth of broth. You might get more. If you have a larger pot, by all means, you'll definitely get more. So you can put these containers in the fridge for up to a week, or you can freeze them for a couple months, really. And then we're gonna throw all the solids away. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye. No! We're gonna do a second extraction, baby. What does that mean? I'll show you right now. Take that water, the water that you had before. You can use distilled water again, whatever water you have. I use some water in my Brita filter. Pour it back into that pot, bring that heat back up to medium because we got more nutrients we gotta get out of this broth, baby. It's probably gonna be about 8 hours later after you started this process. So you're gonna get to a point where you're like, it's time for bed. And if you get to that point, that's fine. Turn the heat off, put a lid on top, come back the next morning. You're gonna be boiling this for so long that the risk of foodborne illness is pretty low. That being said, do this at your own risk. If you're a little squeamish about food stuff like this, don't do it. But I've done it a bunch of times and I'm fine. The next morning, I put the heat on medium-low, let it simmer for about 6 hours. I had to go into work that day, which was fine, and I inspired people at my day job because I'm awesome at my job. No big deal. But after about 6 hours, I did text my partner and I said, hey, how's that broth looking? And she sent me a picture and I said, yikes, let's put the lid back on and turn the heat off because that liquid has reduced significantly. So after about 12 hours, there's about 8, I would say this is actually probably closer to about 18 hours total for this second extraction, I was ready to complete the next step. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a larger strainer and another pot, and we're gonna strain as much of that liquid as we can in the same way that we did before. With the ladle, you're gonna gradually take ladleful by ladleful through the strainer until we just have the clear liquid in the other pot. Okay. So now that we have this second extraction liquid in our pot, we are going to put this on a medium-high heat and let this just simmer. This we don't need to worry about having too big of a boil. You're gonna boil this and reduce it and reduce it and reduce it until it's really maybe about a pint's worth of liquid. Turn the heat off and let it cool. Once it cools, pour it into its own container and it should start to settle up. It should start to stiffen up, much like jello. The only problem with this sugo is that I use it in everything, so it doesn't last very long. Put this in a nice marinara. Put this in anything savory that you want to add a nice depth of flavor, and you won't be disappointed. Or if you're making the bolognese, put it in the bolognese, baby! Bet you didn't know I could sing. I can, so jealous. So that's it. That's how you make broth, and that's how you make sugo. A lot of you have suggested things. A lot of people want to see me make other stuff. I will gladly be getting to those soon. Making YouTube content as well as having a job, that's a big time commitment. I'm gonna do my best to continue doing weekly uploads, but I might take a week off here and there. As always, folks, I wanna thank you all so much for watching. I've gotten some amazing feedback from people, and this has been such a joy just to express myself on this platform and really try new things, you know? I for so long, I've been looking for a creative outlet, and this is such a great way to do that. So if you like this video, please share it with your friends, give us a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Bye!